Okay, so what we are looking at today is what's called the converse. What a converse is you are literally just flipping an if-then statement. So for example, if I was to say, if it's raining outside, then the ground is wet. The converse would be, if the ground is wet, then it's raining outside. So before, what we knew is we knew lines were parallel, then we knew that we could make some conclusions about angles. Now we're going the other way around. We are going to look at what do we know about the angles and can we show that the lines are parallel. So we are just, in other words, flipping what we're starting with. The concept is still the same though. So for example, when you were looking at the corresponding angle converse, what we're saying is if we know that two corresponding angles are congruent. So if we know, if we're looking at our picture, if we know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 5, then we know that those lines are parallel. So then we would know L is parallel to M. Before we knew the lines were parallel, then we could make conclusions about the angles. The second one, alternate interior angles. If we know alternate interior angles, and it can be any pair, so for example, we could do angle 5 or, 3 or 5, or 4 and 6. If we know one of those pairs of angles are congruent, then we know that those lines themselves are parallel. Same thing for alternate exterior angles. If we're using the converse, all we need to know is that one pair, so we could use angle 1 is congruent to angle 7. If we know that, then we know that those lines are parallel by the alternate exterior angle converse. The only one that's slightly different, again, is that consecutive interior angle. We're going to pick a pair of those, and instead of being congruent, those have to be supplementary. So if we look at angle 4 and angle 5, if we look at those angles together, if they equal 180 degrees, then we know that those lines are parallel. So again, before we were making conclusions about the angles because we knew the lines were parallel. Now, because we can use this converse, if we know angles are congruent, then we can say that those angles or those lines are parallel. So what we're going to look at with this practice is we're going to cover up part of our picture to help make things a little bit easier. So what I would recommend is go ahead and label this line A on the other side, line B on the other side, same thing with C and D, just so we can help keep things clear. So we're looking at angle 2 and 4. What you can do is you can either take a Post-it or you can take anything that you'd like. You can take your hand, doesn't matter. And what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and cover up part of your picture. If we look at angle 2 and 4, we have corresponding angles. And those are supposed to be congruent, which we see that they are. So by the corresponding angle converse, we can say that lines C and D are parallel. Now notice we know it's C and D because we covered line B up. We can't even see line B. So that's not even an option. If we look at 5 and 10, what we can do is now we can cover up the right-hand side of our picture. If we look at 5 and 10, those are alternate interior angles. So by the alternate interior angle converse, we could say that 5 and 10, or excuse me, we could say that lines A and B are parallel because 5 and 10 are congruent. If we look at 6 and 10, I'm going to leave that rectangle there because we can still see 6 and 10. Those are consecutive interior. They're supposed to be 180, which they are, so we can kind of look at that and verify that that is true. So by the consecutive interior angle converse, we again could say lines A and B are parallel. If we look at 1 and 14, again, same side is being covered up. The difference is these are alternate exterior. They are congruent like they're supposed to be. So by the converse, we can say, again, lines A and B are parallel. For part E, we're looking at angles 14 and 15. Those are consecutive interior angles, which if you look here, they're supposed to be 180. So they are, so by the consecutive interior angle converse, we could say, and now the two lines that we're looking at are C and D. Those two are parallel. Now 11 and 16, if we look at those, we could technically cover up the top and the left, because those are vertical angles. So because they're vertical angles, they don't prove anything about parallel. So vertical angles, those are thrown out. You don't have to do anything because they don't prove any lines are parallel. 4 and 15. If we look at 4 and 15, we can cover up the left side of our picture. Those are alternate exterior angles. So by the alternate exterior angle converse, we could say that the lines, and again, we're going to look, A and B are the ones we see. Those are the two that are parallel. If we look at 10 and 12, 10 and 12, we can cover up the top. 10 and 12 are corresponding angles, and by the corresponding angle converse, we could say that those are, the lines that we're looking at are C and D. 9 and 13, if we look at 9 and 13, those are a linear pair. Linear pairs do not prove angles are, or excuse me, that lines are parallel, so we could say that that is a none situation. If we look at 2 and 7, 2 and 7, those are alternate interior angles. They are supposed to be congruent, which if we look at our information, they are. And so by the alternate interior angle converse, we can say that those lines C and D are parallel. Go ahead and try out part K there. The problem with part K, as you look at it, those two angles are not along the same transversal. So as we look, if we cover up this, we can only see one angle. If we cover up this, we can only see one angle. So because those two don't have a connecting transversal, this also would be none. So we have none in three different situations. If there's a vertical angle pair, if it's a linear pair, or if there is no transversal connecting the two. So just be careful when you see those. I'm going to give you guys a chance to practice a little bit more on the next example. What I want to do though is go through a couple of these, because what I don't want you to do is become intimidated by the fact that there are so many lines going on. You're still going to cover things up and make it simple. So for example, for part A, we're looking at angle 9 and 22. I can cover up the right and I can cover up the top. And now I can look at this picture, and 9 and 22 are on the outside of those lines I see, and they're on opposite sides of the transversal. So by the alternate exterior angle converse, we could say, and again, the two lines that we see in full are Q and R. All right. Same thing if we look at 8 and 13. I can cover up the bottom and I can cover up the left-hand side. 8 and 13 now are both on the inside of those lines, and they're on the same side of the transversal, so that makes them consecutive interior. Those are supposed to be supplementary, so we're good. So consecutive interior angle converse would then allow us to say that lines P and Q are parallel. If we are looking at 1 and 17, this one's a little bit different, because if I look at this, 1 and 17, they're both on the left, but we have one on the top and one on the bottom. We can still cover up that middle part. And if we look at 1 and 17, they are both in the upper left-hand corner of this intersection, meaning that they are corresponding angles. And if they're both corresponding angles and they are congruent, by the corresponding angle converse, I could say that lines P and R are parallel. So again, cover up whatever it is that you don't need and look at that picture more simply. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a few minutes here to try out these bottom examples, and then I'm going to go ahead and give you guys the answers for these. So please go ahead and do D through J. Okay, so as you guys are checking these, you've got the following answers. Now notice you do have a situation there for part G that it is none. That again is because 10 and 13, those are consecutive interior angles. But if you notice for G, those are congruent. Consecutive interior angles are not supposed to be congruent. They're supposed to be supplementary. We look at part J. J is a little bit tricky because by the information, it's going to tell you that S and T are parallel. However, I know the picture doesn't look like it. Okay, notice that I put here in red. Go by the information given, not by what it looks like. So the information given shows that those lines are parallel, regardless of what the picture itself looks like. So just be careful with that. Okay, now here's the thing. These questions are very similar to the ones you have already done. You are going to look at what kind of angles are we looking at. So those are alternate interior. Because alternate interior angles are equal, we're going to set them equal. So we would just do 10x minus 23 equals 137. Add the 23 to each side. I get 160. And so x equals 16. Now notice here, it does ask you to do the converse. What that's saying is which angles are you looking at? And we already wrote this down, but by the alternate interior angle converse, we could show those lines are parallel if x equals 16. And then you would go ahead and you would do the same for the second one. The difference is these are corresponding angles. So by the corresponding angle converse, if we could show those two angles are equal, we could say that those lines are parallel. So if we set them equal, because they're corresponding, and solve, we would get x equals 7. So if x equals 7, then we could say those lines are parallel by the corresponding angle converse. Same concept for this one. The only difference is these are consecutive interior. And so if they are consecutive interior angles, those are supposed to be supplementary. So instead of setting them equal, I would add them and set them equal to 180. And so I would go ahead and combine my like terms. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract. So if I do 180 minus 66, I get 114. And then when I divide by 6, I get a value of x. So if x equals 19, by the course consecutive interior angle converse, I could say those lines are parallel. So okay, take a minute, try out this last one, and we will let you guys then ask any questions that you have, and you guys can go ahead and get started for today. Thank you.